Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What an inspiring keynote this was this morning. What I'm going to do with you the next couple of minutes is I will discuss with you what happened in the last 5 years regarding the cannabis market in Germany. What are the challenges? Which are the challenges? What are the pitfalls? And of course, we're going to discuss also a little bit more in detail what will be the future with regard to the recreational market, at least from my point of view, which is the point of view of a lawyer who is involved in that business since 2016 and in the life sciences field already for over 20 years, 30 years in practice. And before I came here this morning, I had a radio interview with a German broadcaster. And the interviewer surprised me with the following question. Peter, we had a look at the dentist's homepage, and we found the following slogan. However you need to grow, dentist is here to help. Do you take that literally? And frankly speaking, I love our marketing people. But to a certain extent it was a surprise, because I didn't know about that slogan anyway. So I tried to answer that a little bit more in detail, and what we're going to do right now, and here's what the German speaker usually presents, the agenda. An overview a bit about the historical facts, very briefly, because you all know what happened in Germany in the last 5 years and how we actually developed the medical market for cannabis. We're looking into the liberalization process, some milestones, only very quickly, some real headlines, what has happened in these 5 years to the German market. We talk about the pitfalls, the market situation for medical cannabis as of today and how it developed over the last couple of years. And then we come to what you are all very, very interested in, the liberalization process for recreational cannabis in Germany. So if we look into the timeline, you see that we have actually the liberalization in 2017. In March, the decision of the Federal Administrative Court who has triggered the liberalization was in 2016, and of course then we had the whole concept of a legal environment building up regulatory frameworks for the respective medical cannabis products. In April 2019, the Federal Institute for Drugs and Medical Devices, which is the BfArM, which you all know, actually granted then 3 licenses to German cultivators, which we all know, Aroma and Afria, with a very limited extent to cultivate cannabis in Germany. It's 10.6 metric tons over the period of 5 years, which is by far not enough to serve the market, as you will see later on in my presentation, but at least it is a step forward. The question is, of course, why only 10.6 tons for 4 years? Well, the BfArM is actually purchasing the flowers from the 3 licensed producers and selling it directly to the pharmacies. Of course, they are not using own warehouses. They have used and appointed Kansativa to do that for the BfArM, but they have been extremely conservative with regard to what is actually the amount, the quantity which will be needed for the medical market. It is definitely less than what the market needs, and of course Germany will remain one of the largest importers for medical cannabis in the next years as well. I'd like to make just a very brief discourse here, which is a decision of the European Court of Justice of November 2020. It doesn't really have to do with the medical cannabis market because it was a CBD decision. And the European Court of Justice actually classified CBD as not being a narcotic. This has now to be implemented in the EU member states legislation, but I think it's a big step forward into the legalization of cannabis and cannabis-related products. As such, I have mentioned that here. We will come back to that in a minute at the end of my presentation. Let's have a look into the milestones which we have seen in the last 5 years. Now, these are the rebate contracts. I would love to have anyway here, sorry. Rebate contracts. What are rebate contracts? Pharmaceutical manufacturers, and that's common in Germany, grant health insurers certain rebates for dispensing their dispense, and in return get an exclusivity being the supplier for these health insurance companies. What you have to know as a background is, once a patient has applied together with his physician for reimbursement of the respective cannabis treatment, he will get, if the reimbursement is granted, he will be paid. He gets reimbursed for the cannabis for his therapy. And as such, the health insurance companies having, of course, a very close look into the expenses of these respective treatments. So what has happened here, as at the beginning of the liberalization, and you may know that, the price on a per gram basis in 2017 and 2018 was around 22 euros for the patient. It was around 10 to 12 euros from the wholesaler to the pharmacy, and then the pharmacy had to add 100% surcharge. Why? Because the product was qualified as an extemporaneous mixture and not as a ready-made pharmaceutical. With the consequence, the price doubled. And that was, of course, an issue with the respective health insurance companies, and the Association of Health Insurance Companies and the Associations of Pharmacists have actually found a solution. They have kept the price from the wholesaler to the pharmacy at 9.52 euros per gram. Now the surcharge applies, and of course there's a staggering process. The surcharge will decline very much depending on the quantity of the prescription. So that was the first time a real price regulation mechanism has entered the market here. What happened as well was that due to the competition in the market, the price really went down on a per gram basis from this 9.52 to 6-7 euros per gram, even below that over time for the medicinal market. And then, of course, the health insurance companies had the idea, why don't we apply the same system which we have for ready-made pharmaceuticals also to the extemporaneous mixtures being cannabis. And that's why these rebate contracts actually came into force, and of course there are some companies who have entered into these rebate contracts with the respective health insurance companies, and others may also join because these are so-called open house contracts. Another milestone was the application of the so-called AMRADV to cannabis products. We are talking here about the possibility of irradiation of the plants in order to significantly reduce the microbiology. In 2019, one of our clients has asked us, what do I have to do? How can I actually import irradiated cannabis flowers from Canada into Germany? So we went to the BfArM and said, well, okay, what should we do? The BfArM actually said, well, you just file the application for the importation license for the specific lot with your local authority and just mention that it is irradiated, which we did. The client actually imported in 2018 this irradiated cannabis flowers in Germany. All of a sudden, in 2019, the BfArM actually decided, well, I think we have to grant a specific license under the AMRADV, which is the respective law here, for the irradiation of the cannabis plants. So you have to apply as an importer for a specific license, which was totally new. And if you look into the respective legislation, to the respective law, it is applicable for ready-made pharmaceuticals. not for extemporaneous mixtures. Well, it was actually applied one-to-one. By the BfArM, everybody applied for it, and then, of course, the respective licenses have been granted. What was the reason for it? Difficult to say. Hypothetically, well, the licenses are relatively expensive. You have to pay for it. And actually for each and every product which you're going to import. Let's go to the next milestone. Let's go to the pitfalls, actually. Here are the various licenses which you just listed, which you need if you would like to enter the German market. Of course, you need to have a manufacturing permit, narcotics permit, import permit, then you have a wholesale license. Advertising is not really allowed because it's a narcotic. It's very, very limited how where you can do advertising. And as I said, these products are extemporaneous mixtures, not very mixtures. So if you want to do business here in Germany, you have to either establish your own company and apply for these licenses. Timeline, approximately 6-9 months if you're lucky, very much depending on the local authority where you are located. Or you'll find a company who has already the existing licenses for the import, and you're going to enter into a respective agreement with them, which is, for most exporters, the best way to do it if you want to reach the market quickly. What we are currently discussing, and this is another pitfall, are the quality standards. So, this is a relatively new but very intense discussion for German companies. The precondition for importing products from a country outside of Germany is, first of all, that the country of origin adheres to the 1961 UN Single Convention, which stipulates that you have to have a formal licensing process for the cultivation and the export, a controlled process for the export for medicinal cannabis, or for cannabis for scientific purposes, not for recreational. I will come back to that in a minute. Once this qualification has been checked, then of course the exporter, the exporting company, has to fulfill EU GMP regulations in the process, and of course the products have as well. So if you are an exporter from Canada, you may obtain a GMP certificate locally, which of course is not recognized within the European Union, of course, by the German authorities. That means a German officer from the German authorities has to do an on-site inspection in order to see whether the company in Canada qualifies under the EU GMP regulations. This is not necessary for all those countries where we have a mutual recognition agreement in place between Germany and, of course, the respective country, which is, for example, applicable for Australia. Any kind of GMP certificate in Australia for Australian companies is automatically recognized within the European Union. What you can see right now here is the overlap of GACP and GMP, and that's where the discussion starts. Usually, the respective company, the exporter in the third country, has to adhere to the EU GMP regulations. There are opinions right now that they can actually export GACP processed flowers, for example flowers, into Germany, which are then GMP processed here and then sold to the German market. That is, as some representatives of these companies who are doing it said, disruptive new idea. The question is it covered by the respective legal framework, yes or no? That's a good question because we have an overlap between GACP and GMP and the gray zone in between. A pre-drying process is definitely a process which can be done under GACP. A real drying process is, of course, must be GMP compliant. And the BfArM just recently, in connection with a clarification regarding the AMRADV provisions, has stated that as well. Not as clear as we thought it would be. So, however, we are still in the discussion whether you can actually import into Germany or export from outside GACP processed flowers, which are then GMP processed, further GMP processed here in Germany and then sold into the pharmacies, which is currently the case for some importers. Let's look into the online trade of medicinal cannabis. I have a little bit of trouble with the technology here. Yeah, online trade. Can you sell cannabis products online? Can pharmacies actually send the product to the respective patient by courier services, yes or no? The answer to that is, in principle, that is possible, as it is possible for all other RX products, pharmaceutical products. However, you have to adhere to certain preconditions. First of all, the prescription needs to be sent to the pharmacies. You can't send the product by courier to the patient. The courier is collecting the prescription and brings it back to the pharmacy. So, first of all, the prescription has to be sent by the patient to the pharmacy by mail, which is actually the case also for other RX products. And then the pharmacy can actually send the product to the patient. The patient does not have to appear in the pharmacy, which makes it easier for patients to really select which pharmacy is going to buy his product, which has been prescribed by the physician. A very helpful tool, and we have seen that currently a large number of the respective distribution is done via this online trading, where patients are actually ordering their products, sending the respective prescription to the pharmacies, and receiving the package. Well, of course, the courier service has to fulfill certain preconditions. You can't send just any bicycle courier with a package of cannabis to a patient. That's clear. But there are, of course, the larger forwarding companies like DHL, for example, who can provide these services, knowing what is in the package, which is very important. Let's come to the market situation currently in Germany. As you see, in 2019, the BfArM awarded the contracts for the cultivation. Respective quality standards have to be adhered. The first harvest by Afria actually was done in July 2021 with a small extent, it was 50 kilograms. Then the first harvest of Demican was 100 kilograms back in April 2022, just recently. And of course, also Aurora has made their first harvest available to Cansativa, which is a distributing company for the BfArM in May 2022. So it's slightly developing. We are not there yet because for various delays, which are of course also caused by the respective pandemic, which has slowed down cultivation processes. The cultivators didn't get the respective material which they needed for the cultivation as well. Again here, the total volume is only 10.4 tons. Bear that in mind for 4 years, which can be exceeded or which can be increased by 10% for each and every company. So, where do we stand right now in the medicinal cannabis market? Well, if we look into 2017, the actual demand estimated by the Federal Opium Agency was 10.4 tons. Of course, 2017 was the year when the liberalization took place. Only 1.77 tons were actually imported. 2018, it did increase significantly. In 2019, of course, and 2020 and 2021, I think that is a significant increase. In 2021, we had an import of medicinal cannabis products of around 20 metric tons, which is a market, the largest market in Europe. Compared to other markets in Canada or in the US, it's still relatively small, but increasing. So the question is, of course, where is this market going? I would say we are looking into an increased number of patients. If we have a look into the patient numbers, we are, from different sources you see it would be around 80 to 100,000 patients per year within Germany, which is far less than the initial hopes. Let me see, which were actually 1% of the population, which would have been 800,000 patients. We probably will not reach that figure. But we will see an increasing number. And as I said, it's currently by far the biggest market in Europe compared to other markets like the Netherlands, Poland, or Italy. So, having all said that about the medicinal market, which to a certain extent may be known to you, maybe a little bit more now comes to beef. How are we looking into the legalization for recreational cannabis in Germany? And let me look into the respective process right now, which we have heard from Mr. Greenert, is, I would say, in a relatively early stage. Currently, cannabis for non-medical purposes is non-marketable. It's a non-marketable narcotic substance. I think that is clear. So we have to change the laws with respect to the consumption for recreational adult use. What is the market size? That's a very good question. We have estimates who actually say that the market, the illicit market right now, is in the region of 700 metric tons per year, which in comparison to the medical market is significant. And if you look at how actually the market for the liberalization would develop then, if, let's say, 50% of the total market could be served via a regulated market for recreational purposes, we are talking about 350 metric tons, which is significant in comparison to the current market for medicinal cannabis. And as such, the caution of the lawmaker in that process is understandable. The original process for the liberalization of medicinal cannabis wasn't really a masterpiece. It was done very quickly. It had a lot of gray areas, a lot of unregulated areas, as we have seen, for example, with the irradiation process, but other processes as well. And now the lawmaker would like to make it right. And there is a certain reluctancy to speed it up. Of course, the demand is there. The black market, the illicit market is there as well. There is the danger for health, which we have to attack, as we heard this morning from Mr. Greenert, as well as the protection, of course, of the young people. This has to be taken into consideration. So, what is the timeline? In May, Karl Lauterbach, the Federal Minister for Health, announced the plan that a draft law, it doesn't say that it will be law, it doesn't say that it has been agreed by the Parliament, it has been released as a law. The draft law will be forwarded in the second half of 2022. We heard this morning that this plan is already a little bit extended to the beginning of 2023. Probably it may be even at the end of the second quarter 2023. And then, of course, the whole process starts. And of course, as a lawyer, I like this chart here. That's the legislation process. That is not just we put the draft into the parliament and then we agree on it and everything is fine. No, that's not the case. It very much depends, of course, on the drafting of the respective legislation. We assume that this is a consent bill. Which means the Bundesrat, which is our second chamber, where the majority is by the Christ Democrats, which is the more conservative side and very, very critical with regard to the liberalization, has the majority. So that means we may have another reading. So altogether, I would say that we will not have a final law for the liberalization of cannabis for adult recreational purposes in place before the end of third or fourth quarter 2023. That is kind of a natural process. We can't do that overnight. And if, as we have heard, the first draft will be in 2023, well, then of course this whole process here starts, and we will see how quickly that will be done. And whether the Bundesrat, of course, is giving its consent, yes or no. It very much depends, of course, and Mr. Biedl pointed out, on the discussion between the various parties and how they actually would like to adopt the liberalization of recreational cannabis. Well, that's the law. And then, and now we come to the potential obstacles, which I would like to address here as well. This is just a summary of just what I said, where it's outlined. You will get access
okay, dann mache ich es jetzt nochmal an.
You have access to the presentation, so you don't need to take any kind of notes or
Ich denke mal, danach kommen dann mal ein paar mehr Leute.
What is important are the legal challenges. The first one is, of course, Germany is part of multiple international treaties. And we spoke about that, I think, during the last ICBC. The 1961 UN Single Convention and other two conventions are restricting the transfer of narcotics between its member states. Over 180 countries have signed off on those treaties, which means that you cannot just import cannabis from Holland, Canada, or any other country for recreational purposes. You would be immediately in violation of the 1961 UN Single Convention. What are the theoretical consequences of that? The International Narcotics Control Board, which is the executive control board for the conventions, is empowered to monitor the compliance with the respective conventions. And last but not least, they are setting the quotas for the importation also for medicinal cannabis. So far there was never a problem. It wasn't discussed at all. Now, the BfArM in 2021 actually has increased its demand over the period of time in 2021 and has asked the ICBC to adopt and to grant the permission to import the larger amounts, which have been granted anyway. But without the permission of the ICBC, even for the respective medicinal cannabis, you are not allowed to import these products to a certain extent. So the practical consequences of a violation could be that the ICBC is going to initiate an enforce mechanism, which they haven't done in the case of Canada and Uruguay, who have entered the recreational market as well. But they are in a position to reduce the quota also for the medicinal cannabis imports, which they haven't done. They have not really reacted so far, neither in the case of Canada or Uruguay, but we will see what they may or may not say about the possible cultivation of recreational cannabis in Germany, which would be one solution. And I'm coming back to that in a minute. Furthermore, the Schengen Convention. There is the EU framework,
which of course all the United States are party to. You know, Schengen contract, everybody talks about Schengen contract when it comes to passports and presentation and immigration and whatever. So Germany, who has a very small cultivation for medicinal cannabis at this point in time, cannot just, without violating the respective UN conventions and the Schengen Convention, import these products into Germany. Would the government do that? Good question. I would say they do. So we have to find a way to solve that issue, which Sabrina didn't address this morning. Where do we get the cannabis from for the recreational market, which is a significant market? Do we do homegrown? Do we do cultivation in Germany? Do we ask the 3 licensed producers right now to significantly increase their quantities, which they to a certain extent may or may not do? Are we inviting others to join the cultivation in Germany, which would be a possibility to say, well, we're not tendering it out, no more tendering, sorry, the B5 tender was really, really difficult, I would say. But invite respective interested parties to cultivate cannabis for recreational purposes in Germany if they fulfill certain requirements to get a license. You may have seen that happening in the Netherlands, where 10 companies have just recently been granted the permission to grow cannabis for recreational purposes for the domestic use within the Netherlands. I see here one of those solutions. Other solutions may be, of course, the respective change of the convention. Well, I don't think that you will get healthy countries to very quickly agree to a change of that convention. To terminate the convention, step out and apply again with the provision that cannabis doesn't be applicable for Germany. Very difficult. You never know whether the other 180 or 179 countries would agree to that, which is a possibility, theoretically. But the more practical solution definitely is either we're talking about homegrown or we're talking about domestic cultivation and the respective increase. Then, of course, we are talking about end of 2024, because you have to do that process, despite the fact that you have also to establish the respective infrastructure in order to have this cannabis for recreational purposes distributed to the interested parties. The infrastructure is, we have heard about this morning about licensed shops. Yeah, so we need somebody who is going to grant the licenses, who is going to look and control the respective distribution centers. So that is an infrastructure which you have to set up. And it's a significant effort. And we should have started that a little bit earlier, probably, if we really would like to look into the respective results. So let's see the challenges. The question is, of course, how we attack the problem. Do we do decriminalization like in Holland, or do we really do legalization with the respective non-enforcement? These are the solutions which I just mentioned. The open violation, I don't think that the German government at this point in time would violate international treaties immediately, as well as the Schengen contract. So let's have a look into another issue which we have to adhere to, which is actually the quality of the product. So if you look into the recreational market, from my point of view, there are 3 major factors in order to make it successful. The first one is price. You have to have an adequate price. We have heard that this morning. When I heard about taxation to a certain extent, of course that's an interesting income for the government, but it has of course an impact on the price. So price is the first one. Secondly, is availability. The product needs to be made available. You should not drive 20 or 25 kilometers to the next dispensary shop or licensed shop to get what you would like to buy. So the infrastructure has to be there. So product availability. And the last one, of course, is quality. Price, availability, quality. Well, it should be the other way around as my chart here. But I think that's the real issue. Why? We have heard this morning from Mr. Bienert, the quality of the black market is difficult, to say at least. There are lots of products on the market which are mixed with things which are definitely unhealthy, and of course that is something which, of course, we should attack the market. But what is the right quality? Are we going to GMP again? EU GMP maybe? Good question. It would definitely be an advantage for the recreational market if you have the right quality in place. And GMP would be one of those. So if you look into the challenges, this is an example of how the Canadian market actually developed relative to the medical and non-medical market. You see the medical market is the 19th growing. After the respective liberalization, it declined significantly, and the recreational cannabis actually significantly increased. We can't actually transfer that to Germany as well. From my point of view, and it's a significant issue in the German market, you have the reimbursement. Patients get reimbursed if they get a prescription. That is not the same, to the same extent, happening in Canada. So for some patients, it was much easier to go to the recreational market than, of course, going to a doctor and get a prescription. So what we will definitely see is maybe a slight decline or a kind of a steady line with regard to the medical market, and of course then an increase of the recreational market. If we look into the next chart here, which is the product price, you see that the product price for the illicit market actually went down. The legal adult use market went up, and of course the medical market is to a certain extent steady line. That's exactly what I just mentioned. Whether this can be transferred one to Germany, well, we have to be careful with that. So the challenges of the recreational markets are there. We have to work on a number of issues, a number of problems, which I hope would have been addressed this morning a little bit more in detail. However, it looks like that the current discussions are difficult, and the current government may not be in a position to let us participate in those discussions in more detail. Hopefully that will be the case in the near future. Before I'm going to end my presentation, I'm coming back to two slides with regard to the CBD market, which is an interesting market for all participants in that field as well. We have these three segments for CBD products. Cosmetics, which includes CBD, the so-called food supplement market, and last but not least, the pharmaceutical market. So the cosmetic market is relatively easy to enter in comparison to the food supplement market. Why? The European Commission actually decided that any kind of food supplement which contains CBD is a novel food and falls under the novel food convention or directive, with the consequence that you have to apply for the marketing of these products at the European Commission level. So the European Food and Safety Authority is the one who looks into the respective applications. You have to provide data with regard to the product, it is harmless, it doesn't hurt at all, and that's what a number of companies did. However, what happened is that the European Food and Safety Authority earlier this year decided that they will not proceed with any of those applications for food supplements, for the registration of food supplements, due to the fact that they do not have enough safety data. That is a significant setback for the market. Whether this argumentation is justifiable, probably yes. Is it correct? Difficult to say. Is it helpful for the market? Definitely no. And as such, the respective applicants are now in a position that they have to provide more safety data, and they may not get an approval in the near future. Because the collection of safety data is an enormous effort. The ESA just recently on 28th of June 2022 had an official hearing in which we participated, and they actually pointed again out that basically they are not in a position to grant any of this registration without a showing of safety data. Again, that is a setback for that market. It doesn't have to do anything with medical and recreational cannabis market, of course, but I wanted to provide you with that latest information. It is up and down with respect to the liberalization, also in the CBD market, and we see that as well in the cannabis market. Having said that, I really hope that the German government is putting significant efforts into the next steps in order to find a way to open the recreational market. I have to say that we are, to a certain extent, should not be too optimistic, at least not even too enthusiastic about the timeline. It will come, definitely, but when is the question? Probably sometime in 2024 we may have the first products on the market, if we are lucky. Sorry for that bad news, but that's more a realistic view than what we have heard so far from the government. Having said that, I would like to close my presentation. It was a pleasure to be here. It's a wonderful conference. I would like to thank the headquarters for putting together this excellent program. And thank you very much for your attention.